I just want to give everyone a quick overview of the agenda for this evening. We are joined with some really great resources in the state, the local community, and then someone from a more regional community. So we're going to kick it off with a quick overview of the Conservation District, and then we'll roll down this agenda. And at the end, there will be time for questions. But I think a couple of the presentations might have room for questions as well. So if you have any questions throughout this, please put them in the chat and we will get to them as we can. All right. All right. So just as a quick introduction, my name is Sam and I work for the Conservation District here in Clark County, and we are the ones hosting this webinar for you all. So what is a conservation district? A conservation district is a non-regulatory agency that works with residents of Clark County on a voluntary basis. So we can help with site visits and technical assistance, as well as financial assistance through some of our cost share programming. All of our services are free, and we have been around since 1942 after the Dust Bowl. So our first sorry. Before we roll into our first presentation, I'm going to have Kerri Coper from the Small Acreage Program give a quick overview of their program.
All right. Hold on one second. How is that, Sam?
I think you want to do yeah, there we go. Looks great. Thank you.
Is it the full screen or is it display again?
It's good.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Kerri Coper. I am the Small Acreage Program Coordinator at WSU, Clark County Extension. Our program is offered in partnership through the Extension and Clark County Public Works Clean Water Program. So Extension, you may be familiar with some of our other programs, such as 4-H and Master Gardeners. We have several different types of programs. We're housed out of 78th Street Heritage Farm. And the Small Acreage Program, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about it. This is our mission. We provide small acreage folks like yourselves with the knowledge, skills, and resources necessary to care for land and animals in ways that help keep the water clean and protect natural resources. We do educational programming, and this is what a year might look like of what we offer. We offer several class series and workshops, an expo, tours, and a nice harvest celebration. I'll just go into a few of these in just brief detail. Our next one coming up is a biochar burn demonstration. It's a hands-on demonstration. That's going to be on Saturday, May 3rd at a local residence. And along with that will be a woodland tour. And then we'll have our 18th annual Small Acreage Expo on May 17th. That's a full day of workshops. And we'll have lots of different things that might be of interest to folks with small acreage, like mud reduction, woodland management, a lot of protecting soil and water, grazing. The Conservation District is coming to do a no-till drill demonstration and we'll be discussing meadowscaping along with that as well. So hope to see you there. And then in the fall, we offer a 10-week-long class series called Living on the Land. It's all about land management, stewardship. You can learn about things like pasture and weed management, animal care, soil health, and watershed stewardship. And then each fall, on the third Saturday of each September, we offer this harvest celebration, which is a tour of several Clark County farms. They open up to the public. This is a fun, family-friendly, free event. You just go to the map and you just select which farms you want to go to, and you can go meet your local farmers, buy produce from them, take part in all kinds of fun events, and just generally celebrate the bounty of Clark County. We also offer well and septic workshops and presented by Clark County Public Health. And this is an opportunity to not only help you save money by avoiding costly repairs and potentially becoming certified to inspect your own system every other time, but it also helps protect your own family and the health of the watershed in general. Just a few other things that you can do to protect our watersheds is ensuring that all of your buildings have gutters and downspouts on them, and those are directed in ways that they're not going to cause soil erosion. If you have livestock, collecting that manure, keeping it covered, making sure that that's not polluting our waterways. And then if you have pastures, just being mindful to try to keep them off, your livestock off those pastures during the wet times of the year in a confinement area, perhaps just to keep the soil from being compacted and avoiding erosion. Same with those sensitive riparian areas, stream banks. And you can also do things like planting native plants and create a riparian buffer zone. So yeah, if you think you're doing a good job with watershed stewardship, we offer this recognition program. And if you're interested in that, just reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you more about it. And if you qualify, you can get one of these nice metal signs and become an advocate for others that live near you. Yeah, so thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. You can go to our website. Also, the best way to find out about upcoming events is to get on our small acreage listserv. So feel free to send me your email in the chat, and I will be sure to add you to that. Thank you for having me, and thanks for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for Ryan's presentation on wildfire in Clark County.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Savaike. I am the Forester and Wildfire Resilience Lead at Clark Conservation District, and I'll just be kind of generally talking about wildfire risk in Clark County.
Sorry, is it showing? There we go. Okay.
So we'll go over the basics, kind of wildfire risk across the county, how conditions have been changing recently, some of the recent wildfires, super basic overview of home hardening and the home ignition zone, and then kind of the programs that we're doing to assist with that. So generally speaking, wildfire is going to be any unplanned and unwanted wildfire in a landscape, usually taking place in grass or shrub steppe or forests. For the most part in Clark County, it's going to be forests. The wildfire risk increases anywhere where homes kind of start to interact with the forest in Clark County. That is called the wildland-urban interface. It's really where development starts to meet and intermingle with undeveloped wildland or vegetative fuels. Especially on the east side of the county where we're typically going to have more of our wildfires, this becomes kind of an area of concern for us. And then this is actually a map of Oregon, which may seem strange. But Oregon looks to California for a lot of kind of the upcoming and future conditions that they may have to deal with. And this map really is concerning because it starts to see the shift of these larger wildfires, not only more acreage getting burned over these kind of like decadal shifts, but it's starting to shift further and further west towards the Cascades and even over onto the west side of the Cascades at times, which is something that is not common. And the state fire marshal and state forester for Oregon are actually very concerned of that kind of like Columbia, Washington, Tillamook area, where some of the larger wildfires in state history have taken place. And they haven't burned for 100 years, much like the Atwood burn in Clark County. Some of the more recent wildfires, like Nakia Creek, human-caused. Most wildfires in Washington state, the number from DNR is 80 to 90% of wildfires in Clark County are started by humans, either accidentally or intentionally. But the Nakia Creek fire in 2022 was a good wake-up call for a lot of people. It burned 1,900 acres, 2,900 homes were evacuated, and then 33,000 more homes were kind of in the warning areas. And much like most of the wildfires in Clark County, that was an October start, kind of during those typical east wind events. Jenny Creek, another fire in 2023, where a lot of people that have lived in Clark County for a long time haven't even had wildfire be a common concern. But this started with a 1 mile evacuation. They started to jump on it pretty quickly, so that helped quite a bit. Although wildfire is possible in Clark County, the risk is typically going to be low, but low risk doesn't mean no risk. And your home can definitely survive a wildfire. This home was actually in Washington State, and it was kind of dubbed a miracle home, but really it had a lot of things going for it, both on the home in terms of building materials and then kind of that initial area and home ignition zone, as we'll call it, around it that kind of gave it the opportunity to be defended and survive a wildfire. So some of the things that you can do are really focusing on the building materials and what your home's made of. The biggest things, roofing materials. Not many people have cedar shank roof anymore, but if you do, replacing that with a fire-resistant roofing material such as asphalt or metal, and making sure that's installed properly to kind of a fire-resistant Class A standard is important. Embers typically will kind of land on a home, and they'll start little bits of debris like leaves or something that's dried out over the summer, and that'll give it enough kind of material to get started. Embers also get into vents. That's kind of like the number 2 priority list in and around your home. Embers getting into the vents can get up into your attic and pretty easily start a wildfire. So ensuring you have ember resistant mesh that's an 1/8 of an inch or smaller, depending on ventilation needs for your property, are critical in kind of preventing wildfires from burning your home. And then just kind of making sure that there's no flammable debris on top of or around your home immediately. And then the big thing as well is creating defensible space. The immediate zone, kind of that 0 to 5 feet, should have no combustible materials at all. This is actually something California is trying to push through as legislation in wildland urban interfaces, just to kind of highlight that the importance of having nothing in that first 5 feet. If things are burning up against the side of your home, it just drastically increases the likelihood that the home's going to ignite. In that intermediate 5 to 30 feet, you can start to have trees and things like that. But as you see in the picture, they're really like small clumps. They're not next to one another. That way it kind of breaks up that like horizontal continuity. It's not all going to ignite. If some of it ignites, you have the opportunity to put a small bush out on fire. But if you have that kind of like a full forest in Western Washington, catches on fire 30 feet from your home or 5 to 30 feet from your home, the chance of ignition is quite high. And then at that 30 to 100 feet, you can start to have some of those bigger structure or bigger, both structures and bigger kind of groupings of trees where if, they do catch, they're still not going to be like a full-blown forest fire. And then some of the things that the district is doing specifically, we do a ton of home ignition zone assessments where we will go out and we'll talk with you. We can talk about the building materials. We'll kind of go through and assess your home in terms of fire risk and give you kind of direct advice and recommendations to kind of decrease your fire risk, both in terms of what your home's made of and the building materials, and then all the way out to that 100 feet and just kind of generally what is going on in that area and just give you the best recommendations we can. I'm also the FireWise USA regional coordinator for Clark County. FireWise USA is a national recognition program where you get a community level approach to kind of wildfire mitigation and a lot of neighbors taking steps together. Because if everyone's taking steps in a community towards being safer, then you're going to have a much higher risk of that community being prepared for wildfire. And then the last thing that we're currently offering this spring, but the wait list is pretty full. So that program is done for this year, but we have a roaming chipper program where you essentially would have just gotten some wood and debris from around your home and kind of cleared those areas that we talk about. And you would just leave it near your driveway, and the contractor we hire would come out and chip the wood for you and leave you with the wood chips to kind of build trails in your forest, or use in your gardens, kind of whatever you want to use them as. If you're interested in scheduling a home ignition zone assessment, feel free to reach out either by text, call, or email. You can also visit our website. And yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Ryan. Next up, we will have Cindy Dickinson from CRESA.
Hi, everybody. It's great to at least know that you're out there online. For sure. I am an emergency management coordinator for Clark Regional Emergency Services Agency, CRESA, and we are the local emergency managers. We also have 911 and the regional radio contracts, and a lot of administration that's done for all the public safety partners and the community, for sure. I am lucky enough to work with some great partners here in Clark County who have been working to help establish some of the call-out coordinators for some of the animal groups for evacuation, and these have been used. And at least the Jenny Creek fire and a couple summers ago, which was very hot during that time, and some work that they had done prior. I know that Alice, I see that you're online. The great work that the Clark County Executive Horse Council did and started toward these efforts has really made a difference and kind of made the way for us to continue, not only with the work that they do through the fair and the fair board, but simply by a lot of the preparedness efforts. So I want to recognize Alice and Pat and anybody else that's here from that leadership group to talk about that. So we although we don't have a plan for every single animal in the county and livestock for sure, we do have a plan for horses for barns 6 and up, and then the smaller groups of horses, alpacas and the llamas. And if you would just switch the slide, that would be great. Thanks. And then the goats and the sheep were kind of a work in progress. So these are some of the groups that we've been working on to make sure a call-out coordinator is established. And they talk about basically how it works. The horses 6 and up and the Clark County Executive Horse Council work through the Clark County Fairgrounds. There's a misnomer that people can go and just drop their animals off at the Clark County Fairgrounds and be on their merry way. That is not true. Any of the work that's being done by these coordinators is that, with the premise that you stay with your animals when you're evacuated. If you've got a neighboring barn or you've got a location where you can take your animals, and especially if it's across county from where you are and what the pardon me, where the wildfire possibly is, it's a great idea and a great plan, because you don't want your next door neighbor to be your person, because they are likely to suffer from the same wildfire that you are, for sure. Alpacas and llamas go together nicely. We've got some great coordinators to work on those. And their plans in particular involve working out with the other partners that have farms. And with the premise that you work with partners that would be across the county, or even in some cases, maybe in Cowlitz County up by Longview. I don't think I see anybody on here from the Clark County Saddle Club, but they have come on as a partner in this, and to recognize that animals that don't have a lot of 6 or more or 6 or less barn space, or that the small partners, they've got a lot of outdoor stalls that they would be planning to help during the disasters, and they've been great partners. They may or may not be able to help out with other animals. It's just a wait and see at that point. So I want to recognize the great work that they've done. That's 2 very large facilities that have been designated to help out during animal evacuations for the horses. Alpacas and llamas, I recognize them. The goats is fairly new to this process. And then Alice from the Horse Council has been working with another couple partners to bring on the sheep. And those are the ones that we've gone after. Next slide, please. So how do you keep informed of what's going on in your county? We've got, for anybody, I think Julie in California and maybe the state folks, we're a county of about 540,000 people, not a small county by any means. And as emergency managers, one of our jobs is to make sure that we are informing the public of a disaster or an evacuation that's happening in their area. Oftentimes, we send these public alerts out during the year for a police shooting, maybe a fire situation, lost child, lost endangered adult. And what we do is the maps are set up and geographically around the area that the first responder or the incident commander wants to be notified. So I'm going to ask all of you that are on this call to make sure that you are signed up for Clark Public Alerts. ClarkPublicAlerts.org or on CRESA's website, you sign up to receive those alerts. And that is exactly how you would be kept informed if there were a disaster that you need to be notified in your area. I just said, if you don't opt in, we can't notify you. So that's exactly how that works. At the beginning of my slides and at the very end, I included my information. And if any of you have questions of how this works or need help with it, I can be contacted for there. Next slide, please. So basically what we want you to do, besides sign up for the public alerts, I want to understand how you would also stay connected to the incident. Let's say that your location, your farm, your house was not part of the evacuation group, but you've been hearing things from your neighbors, from your friends, and you want to stay connected. So the best way possible, I have to tell you, is to sign up for our Facebook page. We try to keep that very active and very ongoing and very worthy of finding out what's going on to make sure that those folks who are hearing about this can find out where the maps are. Oftentimes we will screen post maps of what's there in the very beginning of an incident in most disasters that we work. And I've been doing this for 18 years and I can tell you every one of them is completely different, but yet there are some things that are completely the same. Folks want to know, does it affect me? Does it affect my folks? Will I need to evacuate? All those things are very good questions, but let's take a look at, where the fire is and what's happening with it. So we try to post that on our Facebook page. And if you will try to go in and select CRESA 911 on the Facebook page now, then you'll have that listed as a favorite. Our website can also be good for information. I would say that we won't immediately be setting up anything on our website until the disaster, or in this case, a wildfire, were to get much bigger and much longer. We are very, very lucky in Clark County because many of the disasters we've had have been very short-lived. Ryan talked earlier about the Nakia fire. Even then, there weren't any homes damaged in that fire. And there was a lot of people evacuated. What he didn't mention, and I'm sure that he would if he had more time, was that there was red flag warnings. There was very, very curious and very strong winds came up during those storms in October. And, that's what made that fire so complicated, and so complicated for evacuations because the winds were changing. The situation changed so quickly. It was one of the biggest wildfires that we've had to deal with as far as emergency managers. So what we hope to do in the future is get more partners from the community who are interested in helping. Our Emergency Operations Center, where I work, is where we'd be coordinating all the disasters that we're activated for. And we activate for very small reasons and very large reasons. If there were a large situation where a disaster went on for weeks or maybe months, we too would be activated, helping our community, not only recover from the disaster, but just try to bring as much resources as we can to all those people that have had suffered losses. So we have some positions open in our emergency operations center during the activation for coordinators. So we talked a little bit about the fact of which the coordinating groups, which the animals that we've actually done some work with the call-out coordinators. We have people who are signed up to help. But what we're looking for is also somebody to work with the EOC who's actually is the voice for all those coordinators to call and to receive the information that they need and be able to give information back to the EOC. So at the very end of the slide, I've got my information there. And if any of you that you think that's something that you'd be interested in, please give me a call, send me an email. And I see that I've got my wrong phone number on there. That is I should have put my glasses on. It is 360-619-8381. I should get my hand slapped for making that mistake. But I did tell you on here that it is wrong. So it's 619-8381. The email is correct though. So I want to make sure that you have that. And at the end, when we get done, if you have any questions for me, we'll be on here the whole time. Thank you. We're ahead of schedule, Sam.
Everyone's so speedy. That's great. Thank you, Cindy. I will put your actual number in the chat. Okay.
I'll go fix that. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that for you. Here, let me do that. Did you already do it?
I did it already.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Kerri Love from WSDA, I think she's going to hop on next and share her screen.
Excellent. Let me get my video on. Will you let me know when you can share my or when you can see my screen?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Looks good.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, everybody. I would love to introduce myself. My name is Kerri Love. I am with Washington State Department of Agriculture, and I serve as a emergency management specialist. I have a small background in agriculture. I have a bigger background in emergency management, but I did grow up in Eastern Washington, where I come from, 3 or 4 generations of orchardists. So apples and cherries and even some apricots and whatnot. After I speak, I do believe my counterpart, Zach, will be speaking, and he's really going to speak to the animal health side of things. Part of my presentation today is I just really want to be able to share with you what Washington State Department of Ag does should there be an emergency situation throughout the state, whether it's fire related, any other type of natural disaster, or even, foreign animal disease, bioterrorism, etc. So what I'm going to cover in my presentation today will be, I'm going to discuss some of our regional disasters. I'm going to talk about WSDA and emergency management, and also how local, state, and federal emergency management programs will interact during and after an emergency. And I'm also going to try to share some resources and tips to help you prepare and protect your farm in the face of disaster. Let's see. Oopsie, hold on. Sorry, I have a little disconnect here. There we go. Whew. All right. Our mission, Washington State Department of Agriculture, our mission is to really support agriculture, to make sure that agriculture remains economically viable throughout the state of Washington. And this goes by supporting our producers and protecting our consumers, the public health, and the environment. The emergency management program within Washington State Department of Agriculture, our goal is really to work with different partners throughout the state, either on a local level, a state level, and then even higher up to a federal or a tribal level, to really prepare for, to practice responding to, and to recover from all hazard emergencies that can impact animal health or our food supply chains. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. We know as residents in Washington State, disasters happen. In Clark County, I know that you guys have seen your share of severe weather, flooding, and even some wildfire. And some of the risks that are associated with this are additional impacts or ripple effects that you might see due to these hazards, such as crop damages, financial losses, impacts to animal health, and impacts to your farm, and maybe even your family legacy. Many of our farms were something that our parents or our grandparents did before us, and we want to pass it down to our children after us. So how do we protect these things? And it's really not a matter if they will happen, but rather when they will happen. For example, we've had some really historic fire seasons in recent memory. There was the Bolt Creek fire that was, over 15,000 acres. I'm up here. I'm calling in today from Whatcom County. And in 2021, we had a rain on snowfall, which caused a melting event. We had massive flooding, and that flooding actually damaged rail lines. It closed the feed production plant, and there were animal evacuations and mortalities as well. And probably also in recent memory, it was 2019, we had severe weather that caused a mass mortality event in Yakima Valley. And those are all things that we want to try to prepare ourselves for because they are going to happen. But how can we increase our resiliency when they do happen? So just a little review. Washington is a home rule state. This means the responsibility for response lies at the most local form of government. So it means that in your town, should there be a flood, should there be a fire, it's going to go to your town, your local jurisdiction, to the county level. And then if the county level resources become overwhelmed, then they can request outside resources to come in. And that might be from a neighboring county, or it could be state level resources. So they're going to contact Washington State Department of Emergency Management and ask for assistance. And that assistance could be financial. It could just be getting more boots on the ground, more responders. It could be working on communications. It could be a number of different things. And this is when the state will step in to assist. And as a state agency, WSDA may be activated at this time. And, sorry, get my screen changed. There we go. Let me see. Sorry, my screens are messed up. There we go. Thank you. Thanks for your patience. All right. So when activated, WSDA's Emergency Management Program is responsible for coordinating responses to animal and agricultural emergencies in Washington State. The program also partners with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and other agencies within the animal, agricultural, and food sector to prevent and respond to such emergencies. So WSDA serves as a liaison to collect information from the agricultural community in which we serve. And then we're going to share this information so we can help find the resources that are needed. Resources could include Farm Service Agency loans, perhaps USDA grants, or even technical assistance and perhaps engineering from your local conservation district. WSDA does not have a relief fund, so we don't have a piggy bank to reach into and to help and provide money, financial resources to help people. But what we can do is find pathways to link these funding resources to those who are in need. All right. So as it pertains to emergency support, WSDA is engaged, and we focus on assisting our agricultural community by identifying animal organizations and nonprofits to assist with emergency vet care, animal evacuation, rescue, and shelter. WSDA can also assist with animal identification using brand inspection, ear or RFID ear tags, and can also help with carcass management. Right. So you might be scratching your head and say, well, what about FEMA? What is FEMA here? Aren't they supposed to come and help us when there's a time of emergency? And the truth is, it takes a bit to get FEMA activated. So as I explained, as a home rule state, we have to exceed our capacity at a local level, and then we have to exceed our capacity at a state level in order for the state and the governor to request outside assistance from FEMA. So will FEMA come in and fix everything? Well, it's going to take us a while to get to a dollar amount that's high enough to qualify us. And so that's why it's really important that should you experience a natural disaster, that you report your damages to your local emergency management agency so they can actually have a ballpark idea of what the type of damages that they're looking at. They can start tallying up those costs, and it can help them apply for a federal emergency declaration. And the reality is that even though FEMA can offer resources, they will never make us financially or logistically whole again. They're going to help us stay on our feet and hopefully keep our head above water, but we'll never be the same as before when we started. But don't let that intimidate you. I have some good news coming around the corner. Hang tight. So what does recovery look like? So if we have a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, knowing that our resources are somewhat limited, what can we do? So the first thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to say this a lot, is report all your damages. Report it to your insurance company, report it to your local emergency management, report it to your local farm service agency. Again, recovery can be slow, and that can just be, there is limited resources. It could be on the timing of the event, what type of damages were incurred. But it's really important to understand that even though it's a slow process, it's really going to start with you. So having this information as you report it and share it with your local emergency management department will help more funding become available, and it will also help people understand what the need truly is. So if you're going through these things, share it, and you'll actually be benefiting the greater whole, if that makes any sense. All right, here's my good news. Don't despair. There is a lot you can do. Really, I just want you to focus on what you can control. My emphasis, and I can't emphasize this enough, is don't let the thought of everything being burned or lost, or like it seems too much to create a emergency response plan, or it seems like it might be too much to recover, or it's out of your hands because it's a natural disaster. Really, I just encourage you to start with what you can control. And there's a lot that you can control. And I just want to emphasize that resilience is going to start right at home. So basically, the actions you take now are going to lay a great foundation to a successful outcome. Think of it as putting money in the bank. So having that little bit of resilience, having that little bit of forethought and planning will make recovery much easier. All right. So one of the things that you can do now is, before disaster strikes, understand your insurance coverage. Is it up to date? Is it going to cover the realistic amounts of damages that you might be looking at? Have an emergency contact info list ready and available. Make it super easy to find. When I used to go inspect dairy farms, I would ask my producers to make sure that they have their emergency contact list right on the wall, right by the door, right next to the phone, and maybe by every entrance. Somewhere where not only you know where to find it, but maybe if your neighbor's on the property or your kids are on the property, they know how to find this list. Get to know your neighbors. Your neighbors might be your number one asset when you're in a pinch. Your neighbors know the comings and goings at your house. They know the easiest way to go to and from the area in which you live. And they might be your first responders. Your neighbors might be the first people there and know that you have X, Y, and Z animals, or know that your trailer key is here or there, etc. Having a plan with your neighbors can not only benefit you, but also you can benefit your neighbors. There's lots of shared resources that you can do and have that can help each other out. And as mentioned before, I really encourage people to sign up for weather alerts and emergency notifications and heed them. All right. Next, we have I'm going to revisit our list of important contacts. These contacts, again, can include your neighbors, your veterinarian, your local animal groups, your USDA Farm Service Agency, your conservation district, your WSU Extension Office, and any industry groups or associations that you might be affiliated with. And I also, again, encourage you to sign up for your city or county emergency alert notifications and then follow those instructions given. So just really think about, who are you going to call in a pinch, and where are you going to keep this information when you're in a hurry, when you're panicked, or maybe when someone else can find it for you. All right. Should an event happen, whether it's severe weather, fire, etc., I really encourage you to document your damages to your operations that are related to this event. And that documentation could include photos, it could include notes, it could include receipts, hand-drawn maps, etc. Document, document, document. This will help establish need for recovery funding. And also, WSDA can help farmers or ranchers identify any animals that may have gotten away through broken fences or perhaps mortalities. You can lean on WSDA. We can help you through brand inspection again, or other forms of identification to help identify that livestock loss. And that's something, again, that you would want to document. And I have a number here for our animal health program. There's an email and a phone number for help in identifying livestock or assessing disposal options. All right. So if you want to begin initiating the recovery process or how you can get some of the resources that might be available to you, definitely reach out to your insurance provider. Again, your USDA Farm Service Agency. Report those damages to the County Emergency Management Office. And they don't have to be perfect. This can just be ballpark estimates, et cetera, but it really helps them understand what the county is looking at. Make sure you reach out to your peer groups, livestock and farm associations. This is important because many of those people have exactly what you need all ready to go, and perhaps they're not using it and they can help you out, or perhaps they can point you in the right direction to help you find what you're looking for. Also, your conservation district. The conservation district, I wouldn't say that they are emergency responders, but what they are is they're knowledgeable, they're confidential, and they too have a good line to available resources, whether it's grant funding, equip money, et cetera, temporary fencing, and so on, that can help you get you back on your feet and at least operational. And right here is a link. This is a link to, I'm not going to click on it, but what it is, it's a disaster assistance tool that's hosted by U.S. Department of Agriculture. And you can go on this tool and you can enter in whatever information is specific to the event that affected you. So whether, again, any type of natural disaster, crop loss, other damages, et cetera, you can go in there and it's basically going to walk you through a yes/no answer system and get you pointed in the right direction for resources that could be available. All right, recovery. We also need to think that many of us live on our farm as part of our house, as part of our home. It's all integrated. And you need to really take care of yourself in order to take care of the farm. And so we need to acknowledge that you might have other things besides the farm that you need to take care of just to get your feet on the ground. So there are agencies that your local county government will probably have a plan in place with, such as the Red Cross, who can help provide cleanup supplies, potentially meals, and even a caseworker to help you access resources. They can even help locate housing if needed. And also, let's talk about the mental wellness, the mental health side of this. Sometimes you just need to get through the pinch of it, through the rush, and then when the dust settles, you're still dealing with, maybe some trauma from it. Mental health is real. People do have struggles, and sometimes it takes a while for these struggles to show up. So there is help available. This is a recognized thing, whether it's just financial stress, emotional stress, there are resources available. So I do want to point people to that. And in recap, I just want to say, we know Washingtons are subject to natural disasters. You are the best advocate for yourself. The steps you take now can really help line you up for success on the other side. And just take it one bite at a time. You don't have to conquer the whole beast, just one bite at a time. Make an emergency plan. You want to review this and update this plan every year because your contacts might change, your farm might change, your animals might change, all of that. So you want to make sure it's current and just be familiar with it. And make sure the people who are on your farm are familiar with it as well. Make sure your insurance coverage is maintained. And if you grow crops, make sure you register your property at the Farm Service Agency office. One of the things that I've learned is if you have an agricultural property and you have it registered as such with the Farm Service Agency, it makes it that much quicker, perhaps easier, post-disaster to get you in the queue for recovery funding. And then also, again, Make sure you can find local resources such as your community and peer groups, the conservation district, CERT programs, and reach out to your neighbors to see how you can assist each other. And I just want to thank you for your time and attention and the opportunity to speak with you all today. WSDA Emergency Management is always available to you. We are available online. I'll have my contact info here in just a second. But I do believe that the Conservation District is one of your greatest allies, as they are a wealth of information. And that, as I said, they can provide technical support to help you achieve your farm goals and to help protect what really matters to you. You're in capable hands there. So I always encourage people to have a relationship with their local conservation district. And I would just love to open it up to any questions if anybody has questions for me. Or maybe we save them towards the end.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, I think we could take a few. Right now might be a good point. If you have questions, if you want to put them in the chat, otherwise you are welcome to raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute.
I have a question for Kerri. This is Julie with the HALTER Project. Kerri, absolutely incredible presentation. Washington is so fortunate to have you and the resources at the State Department of Agriculture. But here's a question I have. You were referring, I believe, primarily to commercial livestock producers. Does the Washington State Department of Ag also have the authority or jurisdiction for companion animals in disasters, or strictly the commercial producers?
Well, there's authority in just, okay, everybody. I just want to say that it's not just commercial, but
Okay,
in
great.
what way, like authority or jurisdiction, because it depends on what we're talking about, I'm sure. Yeah. Do you have an example?
Well, also, I guess it would tie into something that Cindy said about standing up the call-out coordinators in the AOC. And so a collateral question would be, Cindy, at what point does the EOC start activating its call-out coordinators for animals? And then to that end, Kerri, at what point is Washington State Department of Agriculture requested or available to provide any type of assistance during the disaster? I'm not talking about recovery here, but during the disaster for companion animals. So this will help me frame some of the information that I share later.
Yeah. Cindy, you had the first part, so I'll let you go first and then I'll come in.
Sorry.
Sure. When we're probably likely to get called first before we call the call-out coordinators, because we won't know when our small group of emergency managers are sending out the public alerts and maybe even reporting on scene to the IC. For instance, I'm a liaison officer. I oftentimes will go on scene, but what would happen is we'd get a call from one of the call-out coordinators, say there are animals that are being evacuated, or we're getting calls about folks that need some help with evacuations. So we won't know ahead of time that there are farms that need to be evacuated until somebody starts telling us. And I think that at that point we have a call center that we would probably stand up and advertise that for folks in the community who have questions. They can start calling, and we'll help to make sure that the right people get those calls.
And Cindy, one more question about that. At what point or at what evacuation level or alert, ready or set, do you activate your call-out coordinators?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, in wildfire evacuations, there are 3 different stages. 1 is get ready, 2 is get set, and 3 is go now. A lot of us who are familiar with the animal evacuations and response plans for animals know that many of our folks are liable to start, moving their animals to a safer location at the ready, get set on level 2, because they know that it takes them too long to try to make that happen. So I think that that is when they're going to start calling their friends and trying to make sure that they have enough trailers there to be able to transport, and then and work internally to decide if they have some place to take those animals, or if the bigger coordination group needs to be brought in. Did I answer your question, Julie?
Yes, that was great. I'm trying to determine, how to give people when it's my turn to talk the information that supports your info and Kerri's info best, and that knowing when to go and when to prepare to go and when to be thinking about when to go are among the most important messages that we have. Yeah,
it's tough, and especially tough when you're ramping up in any disaster, any situation, because things just do not go, smooth as we've maybe talked about today. It just doesn't happen, but they hopefully will get the information they need and start working on their own plans.
Yeah, and we know that planning and preparing helps you develop that muscle memory that makes things go much better and much more calmly when the stuff actually is happening.
Yeah. And I would just chime in too, when do people need to prepare? I would say, hey, you know what? If it's for wildfire, how about every spring they review their management plan and prepare? Make sure they have their medicine, they know where their medicines are, they know their evacuation routes, et cetera. But also, I'm not familiar with Cindy's call out for animal people who assist with that, but I do know that for example, the fires in Spokane, I think it was last summer, there were animals that needed evacuated, and so they contacted WSDA, and then WSDA has MOUs or mutual agreements with other agencies. Most of them are like nonprofits, but they're specialists in animal welfare, such as the National Animal Rescue and Sheltering Coalition, or NARSC, NARSC, and they will help organize volunteers to assist with, if there's not at a local level, to assist with that evacuation, that sheltering, that feeding, that animal health, et cetera. So as it escalates, as that grows, there are agencies both near and far who can come in and assist with that.
Great.
But I would also emphasize, one thing I can't emphasize enough is don't wait till the last minute to leave. If you're in an evacuation level, 1 where it's be aware, evacuation level 2, stand by, 3 is go, I would leave it 2, honestly, because you're not stressed out. Your animals will be less stressed out. If you have that ability to go somewhere for a day or two, over to a different property, I would take advantage of that if it's available.
That is one of our strongest messages. It's also one of the hardest for people to swallow because, especially if you have big animals, it does take more planning. It may take more resources, but I always tell people, what's the worst that can happen? You take off, everything goes calmly, you're loading and going before you have huge traffic jams, before you're in dangerous driving conditions. And, you spend a couple of days with a friend or in a beautiful place. Your animals are not stressed, you're not stressed. And if nothing happens, you return home. If the bad thing does happen, you got out early and safely and calmly, and everyone and everything is going to be better for it.
Agreed.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. If there aren't any other questions at the moment, I think we will have Zach from WSDA go ahead with his presentation.
Okay. Can everybody see or hear me? Everything looks okay?
Looks good.
Okay. Thank you, Sam. I'll get started. So my name is Zach Turner. I work with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. I'm going to give kind of an overview presentation about wildfire preparation, response, and general impacts to animal health. Kind of an overview of the presentation itself. We'll try to introduce, our organization. Kerri gave a great overview, and then I'll skip some of the stuff if it's redundant. Preparing for an event is one aspect. We'll also talk about what an emergency looks like, and I'll touch on some of the recovery stuff. A lot of my experience is kind of in the response field, and I can share about that as we go. Our mission, so I work specifically within the WSDA. I work in the animal health division, and we're tasked with promoting and enhancing animal health specifically. We're also in the space of, maintaining economic vitality, ensuring business continuity in the face of disasters and those kinds of things, and also safeguarding the citizens of Washington State. So we can certainly have an overlap in animal and human health in the form of zoonotic diseases and other things that can be transferred, and certainly disaster impacts can overlap in those areas. So we're focused on promoting health in all those spaces. And how do we do that? We collaborate with a lot of other organizations and groups. We do education and outreach, hoping that we can prevent or prepare for emergencies in that way. And then we do have a role in response and public service through disease or disaster recovery and response there. So when we're not preventing diseases or impacts to animal health, or educating about it, we're preparing for an emergency response. We'll do things like tabletop exercises, simulating events. So if we're not actively responding, we're kind of preparing for a response. And I'm really a member of a very, very talented team in our animal services division. So I'll make kind of some call outs. So I'm the regional veterinarian for the western part of the state. That's kind of why I'm speaking with y'all here. But we have some other representatives and other veterinarians located throughout the state, kind of strategically separated so that we can respond to any local disasters or health events. Generally, the closest person can respond. And we all kind of work under the state veterinarian. If you're not familiar, that's Dr. Amber Idle. She kind of sets some of the rules and regulations for our office. And then we have a lot of very important support staff as well. Our animal disease traceability program manager, David Hekimovich, and our reserve veterinary corps coordinator, very important in this space, Dr. Mindy Buswell. And then we have our program assistant, Rachel Burkhardt, and it really takes a team to make the dream work. A little bit of me specifically. I did all my schooling in my home state of Georgia. I cut my teeth on a little bit of disaster response in that area, mostly related to hurricanes and tornadoes and that kind of thing. But when I came out to the West Coast to continue my educational journey, completed a residency in California, and that's where I kind of got some experience in wildfire response. Prior to moving there, did not realize that there was this wildfire season and that this was such an impactful area, and then just got thrown right into it because there was a big need for animal health responders at that time. And a little bit of a background, I tend to focus most of my experience and career in my career has been working with livestock and large animals, camelids, horses, small ruminants, not as much in the cat and dog space. And then I've pursued more specialties in preventive medicine. So my focus is really on how can we prevent or prepare for a response to make it more efficient or impactful, and hopefully transition some of my experience and expertise towards that space rather than response and treatment. So to continue, I've mentioned a little bit about kind of animals and human health, and that really all boils down to the One Health approach. You may have heard this before, but this is generally kind of the intersection between animal health, human health, and environmental health. All of these things can kind of impact each other. Dr. Calvin Schwabe is really kind of the father of this thinking, and he was the father of veterinary epidemiology, and he taught at the University of California, Davis, and he has an enduring legacy there. So I have to give him a call out for kind of blazing this path, and everybody kind of followed his lead, and that we all have to really work together to pursue this One Health outcome and to minimize the negative outcomes for all of these affected parties. Really, wildfires and disasters, it's a transdisciplinary problem. I won't go into all these specifics here, but there's a lot of drivers and influences, compounding problems, and a lot of things that make this a unique issue that we have to work together to respond or prepare to respond and prevent some of the impacts here. So it's a really complicated issue. It's one of many disasters that might require veterinary assistance. So we kind of tend to think about disasters, whether they're chemical, biological, radiological, or other things. In this kind of area, we're talking about a natural disaster or wildfire, but we certainly have veterinarians that are, tasked with responding to animal health issues caused by a number of different types of disasters, and they can be man-made as well. And some of these can be related or sequelas or sequels to the initial disaster. The organizations with the responding vets, to kind of call out where some of these people might be coming from. There are a number of veterinary volunteer response groups that are generally state dependent on where they're organized and sourced out of. In Washington State, we have the Reserve Veterinary Corps. I mentioned Minnie Buswell. Dr. Buswell is the coordinator. When I was in California, we had the Veterinary Emergency Response Team, or VERT, and then the Student Veterinary Emergency Response Team. So we activated veterinary students because the need was so great that we needed additional animal health professionals that students needed to help respond, veterinary students. You may have regulatory or government organizations with veterinarians responding. It's not just the WSDA. We have the whole alphabet soup here. We have the federal government counterparts in the USDA, also Department of Agriculture, but at the federal level. We have health partners at the state and local level. And then this third group is really kind of the private area of clinical veterinarians or hospitals, generally within the response zone, that might be called in or might certainly be affected in increased cases. Moving forward, I'll talk a little bit about some of the wildfire hazards that we have, and then we'll go into some of the specific tips and prevention things that you could do. When I'm talking about a wildfire hazard, I'm kind of trying to think about this in terms of short-term and long-term impacts and symptoms, ways that they can impact animal health. We might think about the physical burns that an animal might experience, and just like a person that might have some really short-term evident symptoms that we need to deal with immediately. But there's also some kind of long-term impacts and symptoms related to some of the smoke and air quality, air pollution that results, and some of the exposures there. And then a really impactful area that's not immediately evident are some of the damage to pastures and infrastructure that really speak to the loss of access to basic needs. When we're talking about livestock or large animals on the landscape, their feed sources are going to be impacted, their sheltering ability is going to be impacted, and that can be underestimated in the face of the emergency. So not to be underestimated here. It's a major contributor to the hazards of wildfires. The way that wildfires and air affects air quality, I don't think we talked about this too much, but there's a lot of things that are incorporated into smoke. What seems to be one of the biggest issues are the fine particles within that. They can be inhaled into very small parts of the airway that are very delicate and can cause really significant issues in the short and long term. We see inflammation of these particles, and it's not just the particles. There's carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, other types of organic chemicals and other things, and too many to name constituents in smoke, and it can depend on what's burning. But all these things, the mixture of chemical compounds, particles, can really cause a lot of inflammation to the eyes and respiratory tract, or some of the areas that we see the long-term impacts here. And the air quality to demonstrate, this is in California, but the ambient outdoor air pollution is a major cause of death and disease. And this is just to refocus some of the symptoms and diseases that we see in humans. It can certainly affect animals. I think we have less data and cases, certainly, but the impacts to primarily the respiratory system, where the exposure to smoke can cause some major impacts. It could be related to the dose and duration, how much exposure and how severe the air quality is impacted, that might lead to some of these impacts. Some of these really chronic diseases or types of cancers we may not see in even companion animals or livestock, in that there hasn't been enough time to develop symptoms, but sometimes there can be an underlying impact that we're not seeing, symptoms that we're not seeing. And certainly with livestock, we see that with impacts to production. If they're milking cows, beef cows, or milking goats and that kind of thing, some of these, what we call subclinical impacts, just not really resulting in a symptom other than a decrease in production. And that could be milk products or other things that the animal was intended for, it certainly can be affected by an ongoing exposure or even a short exposure. Ventilation is already really important for livestock, especially, and this is really an image of a larger, really commercial barn, but it kind of just shows some evidence of some of the principles here, and that there's a lot of consideration for the quality of air and how that can be impacted by manure products and waste products. And there's always a consideration for the quality of air, and that's intaked in the direction of flow and all of these things. We have to think about how the air collects moisture and heat and other contaminants. And then how do we measure this? So ventilation as an impact is something that's important for production, even outside of wildfire threats, but it can be particularly important to consider in these situations. And thinking about how we want to measure it. Are we looking for a particular contaminant? Is heat or moisture, the relative temperature humidity index, is that the major threat that's happening because of the compromised air quality in the short term? But certainly it can have major impacts. When we're talking about switching gears a little bit into a disaster preparation, some of the checklists and things and tips and important notes. Tips for pets. I think I'll also want to highlight some important resources here. And most veterinarians are going to rely on the American Veterinary Medical Association, which kind of sets a lot of professional expectations and kind of rules for our profession. And so this is where I get a lot of information, a lot of veterinarians do, and where I would turn the public to a very good source. But there's a lot of tips for pets in the face of disasters that are on the website, and I've kind of taken a snapshot here of some of those tips. But there's some considerations where if the air quality is affected, and we're talking about sheltering, keeping pets indoors and windows shut, minimizing the exposure to those contaminants in the smoke can be very important. Birds are known to be particularly susceptible, so they really can't have any outdoor contact. That air quality is really important, and inflammation to their really complex respiratory systems that involve air sacs and other things are very delicate and can be heavily impacted by the smoke. Dogs and cats, if they have to go outside, a dog we're talking about really has to go outside for bathroom breaks, likely. You want to kind of minimize that time when possible. Definitely avoiding intense outdoor exercise during the periods of poor air quality. So if I've got a dog that I think we all own dogs that may have some exercise requirements that they just can't be cooped up inside for days on end. And so you have to think about exercising them at some point to consider their health and behavior in that point. So you might want to think about doing that when the dust and smoke has settled, or maybe at specific points of the day when the air quality is a little bit more permissible. And then having a pet evacuation kit ready. I have a little bit on the next slide on what that could incorporate. And there are some specific checklists available for you online. Just a cute little photo here. I like thinking about the dog and their pack of to-go stuff, their evacuation kit, just like we might have something for people, taking that One Health approach. We've got our furry family members that we have to consider. And the evacuation kit includes a lot of these things. Food and medicine for the pet. We have specific recommendations on how much and what's included. Usually it's something like 3 to 7 days, but it really depends on what you expect to be the interval that you're going to be away from that resource. A first aid kit that could include some different things for an animal, generally bandage materials and that kind of thing. Sanitation, we want to think about if we contaminate or get something dirty, how we're going to clean it. Sometimes these disasters can really be a biosecurity nightmare. And when I talk about biosecurity, that's all the practices and managements that we do to prevent disease. This type of a disaster is really a recipe for disease to come in as kind of a secondary problem. And what we really don't want to be doing is dealing with the disaster recovery and then a disease event. So it's important to think about disease prevention, especially in these times when the animals and the people are vulnerable. We may need to consider important documents, proof of ownership, medical records, or that kind of thing if they might end up going to the veterinarian. Travel supplies, that's probably going to include some kind of transportation Comfort items, easily overlooked, but very important for our furry family. If it's going to cause a lot of anxiety and that behavior could be an issue, we want to think about whatever we can do to ease that in the interim. I'm going to talk a little bit about livestock and large animals. This is more the space that I work in, but similarly, there are available resources that the American Veterinary Medical Association has available involving large animals and livestock in disaster response. You can find a lot of this information there. But to summarize, I think that it was Ryan earlier that was talking about defensible space. Very important for farms. And there may be some other benefits here. So removing dead trees or brush around the barns, particularly that distance leading right into the barn is important. I say there's some other benefits because there's some interesting research that's come out about how, if you reduce some of this brush immediately related to the barn, you might also reduce some of the biting insects and their habitat, reduce some of the burden there. Especially going into that summertime area. So you may have some other benefits there on removing that underbrush where these biting insects love to hang out and multiply. Getting rid of that habitat can be beneficial for those reasons, in addition to removing this possible source of quick light for a fire that could lead to really severe impacts, especially if it's right next to the barn, right next to your animals. With livestock evacuation, the main consideration really is transportation. How are we going to move these animals? In a lot of cases, even from my experience as a private vet going out to other people's farms, notice that most people generally don't have a transportation situation for large animals just regularly. So maybe they had something to get the animal into the pasture initially, but now there's really nothing to get it out. And so the call here is to consider that moving into these periods where we're having increased risks of wildfires, to think about how we're going to transport these animals. And if transportation is not feasible, we're talking about a sheltering plan. And that's definitely the case for some of our larger commercial farms when we're talking about dairy or something that has a lot of equipment and large numbers of animals. It'd be very difficult to arrange for that. It can be arranged if the circumstances require it, but generally they might have to consider a shelter-in-place option. Records and inventory management, very important. I think we were talking a little bit about indemnity and other things that could be important for that, or just keeping track of the animals that you have and that may become lost, especially if there's damage to infrastructure like fences and that kind of thing. And with livestock, we're talking about animals that generally have to live outside and have a lot of exposure to maybe poor air quality in the cases of these wildfires. So their exposure tends to be very high, and we're usually talking about a 4 to 6 week period of recovery where we want to reduce stressors to those animals to allow them to recover. Because even if they don't have overt signs of disease or coughing or issues, very likely they have some internal signs that they're recovering from. They're generally going to have hits to their reproduction if they're intending to breed. That's probably not going to have the best outcomes during this period. Transportation really wouldn't be recommended. If you can rest them after this event. You really want to minimize activity during this period, considering that there's a lot going on inside of these animals as they're kind of battling the effects of the reduced air quality and some of the irritants there. You want to provide plenty of fresh water. Their water intake goes way up in the face of these situations. If you can, limit dust exposure. Misting of hay or dust sources, feed sources can be very helpful in reducing further exposure to dust and those kinds of things. And certainly you want to consider limiting exercise or performance. I guess this would be really more for equine patients. You really wouldn't want to subject them to any kind of exercise or trail rides or anything like that. Really, you're considering keeping them in this period to reduce those stressors of performance and exercise during this period. Some other general considerations, just a general thought. We were talking about this on the other slide, but we're considering companion animals or companion pets as an addition to our own prep plans. So additional food, additional water, everything that you're considering for you and your kids or your family, you're considering that for your pets as well. Livestock preparation, some additional things. If sheltering in place is the option, and preparing for possible disruption of services for an extended period of time can be really important. So there might be a disruption in gas or electricity, and especially if there's a water pump involved or something related to your water source, disruptions there can disrupt access to water, which has a host of animal health problems, and even that could be the most severe impact of a wildfire, because quick removal of a water source, and then even if you return it very quickly, can cause really significant signs. I'm particularly thinking about pigs are known to be really susceptible to this, but really all livestock and really all animals, if they're deprived of water, can have significant effects. But pigs in particular, when you remove it and then give it back, the water really accumulates in their brains, and they get this really awful condition called salt toxicity syndrome. It can be fatal. Unfortunately, I have been called out to respond to those cases, and whether it was a disaster or something else that interrupted water supply, that in itself can be fatal. So something to consider in your plan. The evacuation plan, again, I have to hit on physical transport. Maybe moving a lot of food and water is not feasible. At least moving the animals can be great to move them from immediate harm. But considering all that ahead of time is much more important. And then shelter in place may be the most reasonable option, depending on the number of animals or the available transportation options. But you give yourself a lot more options if you think about it ahead of time. And then I'll talk a little bit about the response to disasters, and this is a little bit more fatalistic and a little bit more colored by my own experiences in this case. And I'll tell you that the prevention is worth so much more than the treatment or the care. And when we start talking about some of these treatments, some of them are not as effective, or we don't have as many options for livestock, and we go into some really challenging spaces here when we move from the prevention and preparation to the response. But I'll comment on it here. So when we're talking about companion animals or pets, I have a little note here for a disclaimer. This is not generally the space that I have experienced in our practice, but I have worked at hospitals that also take care of companion animals, or what I call small animals, for response to wildfires. And it generally, the prognosis or the treatment, you have the options are basically limited or available depending on the extent of the burns. Generally, the amount of the surface of the body that's covered in burns is pretty heavily correlated with the outcomes of those patients, at least in the short term. There's a lot of really promising research about some new treatments and some things you may have seen in the news. Some treatments, UC Davis has kind of pioneered this tilapia skin kind of contact treatment that kind of helps the skin recover more quickly. Generally, if there's severe, significant burns, these animals have to be referred to some kind of tertiary center that has, around the clock care and around the clock types of machines and more advanced care items than you may find at your typical clinic. And they may require extended hospitalization, especially if the burns are widespread or severe, or if there's significant inhalation of contaminants or smokes. There may be a treatment center in the evacuation zone, but generally those veterinarians or animal health responders are doing a short-term triage and stabilize. They're not going to focus on animals with superficial issues. They're going to focus on the ones that need immediate care, severe symptoms. But I think that we kind of underestimate some of the long-term impacts. And so I talked about some of the smoke damage and other things to the lungs that can require an extended recovery and attention to those animals, an extended period of rest for those individuals. And oftentimes that ends up being at home, but if they have to be treated, there are more options with companion animals than, as we'll see, with livestock and large animals. So the unfortunate situation with livestock is, in my experience, they're very severely affected by wildfires, especially when they have direct contact. And anything, regardless of what areas are affected by the burns, if the feet are affected, we have a major problem. because the large animals, we're talking about over 1,000 pounds, we're talking about horses and cattle, can be the case for larger alpacas, larger camelids, or certainly pigs, if we're talking about larger production pigs. But if we have a large animal that is really not intended to be laying down for large amounts of time, they actually can develop this syndrome related to the pressure that's on their body and not having that on their feet, not being on their feet. And it kind of results in a downward spiral where these animals can seem like they're bright and they may have interest in feed and water, but as they continue to not stand, that becomes an issue in and of itself. Because what we say in the veterinary profession with large animals, when they experience a 24-hour period of being down completely and not standing, their prognosis for survival decreases by about 50%. So every 24-hour period that they spend completely recumbent or laying down, they are increasing their risk of this syndrome and having a really bad outcome. And it really doesn't matter what is causing them to not be able to stand, whether it's damage to the feet from wildfire or some other type of systemic or body-wide infection or other types of things, regardless of what put them in that position. If they're down for extended periods, that animal is going to be in their intense stress. There's some things that we can do to relieve that, trying to rotate the animal or put them in slings and that kind of thing. But our opportunities to do that are very limited depending on how many animals are impacted. And so unfortunately, when I've been called to respond in these cases, we're talking about, in the best case, like 10s or 20 animals, maybe. But if we're dealing with hundreds of animals and they're all impacted by these changes, there simply are not the resources to relieve these issues. The treatment options, in addition to when we're seeing these symptoms, can be limited. The supportive care, we're talking about giving them fluids. Pain relief, I have some questions on our ability to manage pain in the long term with these animals. Wound care, very important. So we talk about burns and those kinds of things. How are we going to bandage that? How are we going to reduce the wound there? Some people talk about giving antibiotics because they've been exposed to smoke. Maybe we want to prevent a respiratory disease there. There's a lot of pushback in the veterinary community here, though, that may not be a judicious use of antibiotics if we're just using it to prevent for a disease. And so oftentimes we're holding on to that as a resource and waiting to see if there are symptoms of pneumonia or symptoms of a respiratory disease and using it for those situations. A lot of focus in that area to reduce our antibiotic use as a profession. So this may be an area that we may not recommend it because it may not be directly relevant or important, because the issue with the lungs right now in this phase is inflammation, and an antibiotic is not going to help with that. Long-term rehabilitation can be difficult or impossible. I mentioned that some of these animals rely on a lot of individual care, and that may not be available at the population level, unfortunately. And restraint, I can't mention enough, is so important for being able to respond or do anything for these animals. And just to respond, I've created this term, the myth of the dart. That's throughout my time in private practice and as a veterinarian, I've routinely had folks or farmers or producers ask me about the availability of using a dart gun or something like that to restrain an animal to apply some type of care or treatment. And that's really a myth that veterinarians regularly carry that around or want to use this type of a method to restrain animals. There's a lot of difficulty in the application of the technology, at a lot of situations where the darts don't fire or they don't give the correct dosage that we want. And it's inherently dangerous to apply some type of an anesthesia to an animal, especially an animal that's been stressed with burns or inhaled a lot of smoke. They may die from the anesthesia alone. So that restraint method is definitely not recommended. It's not safe for anybody involved. It might cause further damage to the patient. So it's certainly not recommended. And if there's no restraint, so we're talking about chutes or panels or those kinds of things that might allow us to handle these animals. If it's a horse, that's great. Maybe the animal's been socializing enough that we can put hands on them. That gives us a lot of options. But if it's an unsocialized animal or an animal that has no facilities to be restrained, then we're really limited on what kind of bandages we can even apply. I would be really hesitant to even apply a bandage because it could turn into a tourniquet if it's not removed. in any regular time frame. And then I've seen cases where a bandage fails to be removed. Maybe it's on a claw or a part of the arm or leg, and that if they lose blood flow to those areas, they can lose the limb or they can lose the claw, and so that can do more damage, more harm than good. So we really want to take a realistic assessment of the recovery path and the resources needed to respond in these cases. So some of the general considerations I hit on the restraint and handling. This is likely an ongoing need. It's not just a one-time a veterinarian or an animal health professional can come out and give you some advice or give them a treatment. Oftentimes this is ongoing. So when I've been called out to respond to incidents where cows have been burned or they've inhaled large amounts of smoke, they're generally going to require a treatment or some type of pain relief more than once. It's likely going to involve an injection. I can only think of one product that is kind of like a pour-on kind of situation, and that might not even be the best choice with these animals to relieve the pain that they're experiencing on an ongoing basis. So you need some way to handle them and put hands on them to even assess how they're doing, see how they're doing, or to give them any type of a treatment. You want to think about the future production and what further inputs we have, because there are some additional concerns here. I mentioned that this is kind of a biosecurity nightmare. If we've moved these animals or stressed them in some ways, they're very likely to develop disease, or if they already have a disease, they're very likely to develop symptoms of it. Travel, mingling, this is all a recipe for stress. And this is all a recipe for some other problems with these animals after even after the wildfire has been eliminated. With very severe wildfire outcomes, I hate to talk about this, but this is the space that we do have to work in if there is a disaster. In a lot of cases, when there is no good outcome or there's not enough resources to respond to these animals, we have to consider humane euthanasia. And I think it's very reasonable, especially considering with some of these large animals that can't be handled, or we can't apply any type of pain relief to them on an ongoing basis, especially if they have severe burns or damage to their limbs. I'm very hesitant about what quality of life they have. And so again, we're referring back to the American Veterinary Medical Association for accepted methods and to kind of define what are the requirements that outline animal welfare, which is generally that they're free from pain, they're free from insecurity of their shelter, food and water, free to express normal behaviors, and all of those things can certainly be impacted if they're severely burned or exposed to wildfires. And especially if they have damage to their legs and they're unable to rise, it's really not acceptable if they're not able to walk at all or exhibit normal behaviors. These animals are not designed to lay for interminable lengths of time. And so we do consider some of these other methods of euthanasia, but it's important to consider that it is an unfortunate tool in our toolbox to have to turn to, but it is helpful to relieve the suffering in these cases. And there are a lot of options that do that quickly and very effectively at removing that suffering. And so that could be pictured here, a captive bolt, which is basically a firearm without some of the risks with the projectile and gunpowder, but it involves more of a stun approach and a retracting bolt that can be used more safely in these situations. We have some considerations on if we're using some type of a solution to do that. Oftentimes the ones that we think of that we reach for with cats and dogs are very, very costly when it comes to a large animal. So we're talking about a dosage that's really huge. When we're talking about a 1,200 or 1,500 pound animal, I've worked on bulls that are over 2,000 pounds. If we're talking about that dosage of medications, it's exorbitant what that can cost, not to mention what the environmental effects might be if those chemicals in that quantity are introduced into groundwater and other things. So we have some considerations on the method of euthanasia and the disposal of the carcasses. Maybe we're talking about burial, composting, or offsite. We do have some advising resources in this regard. But if there's a large mortality event, these are some major considerations for the response efforts on how we're going to respond to these issues. Previously, I kind of thought I was going to be the dark cloud, and then Kerri was going to give you this ray of sunshine, but unfortunately, I'm the dark cloud following the ray of sunshine. We saw the recovery steps a little bit before, so I've talked about a lot of the bad, more fatalistic stuff. I'm happy to answer some of these questions, but together, I have a little bit more of the I guess, the darker side of clinical response. But Kerri gave you a lot of really good things to be hopeful about how we can prevent some of the worst outcomes here, and that really goes a long way to preventing what I talked about in the last couple of slides, which are the outcomes that nobody wants to be dealing with. Here's my contact information. You can feel free to contact me directly with any questions or concerns. I will kind of stop sharing here and then return it back to the group. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was really, really informative. I appreciate it. Awesome. Well, I think we are at the 7:30 point. Julie, I have your PowerPoint up, but you just tell me what resource you want me to share, and I will make sure
Yes,
the screen, and then
yeah, this has really been, I mean, the gold standard of panelists in terms of a discussion of animal disaster preparedness. And Zach, I just want to say, I think you and I might have crossed paths. So I got into this space, a little bit about me. I got into the space of animal emergency and disaster preparedness and response, not because I was a student at UC Davis, but some of my oldest and best friends were my mentors who urged me to become involved in this space. And so I have been a sponsor of the Student VERT since its inception. And two of my strongest mentors were Dr. Madigan and Dr. Davis. And just listening to you, I'm thinking that you might have been a student of Dr. Madigan's. I have been a member of a number of animal disaster response teams in the state of California and a couple of national teams, although I have never deployed nationally. I began deploying with the UC Davis Veterinary Emergency Response Team back in 2015 in the Valley fires. We also supported the California Veterinary Medical Reserve Corps at that time. Fast forward to now, I am now a volunteer with CVET, the California Veterinary Emergency Team. And for those of you not familiar with these kinds of resources, I am not a veterinarian, nor am I a vet tech. I am a non-medical support volunteer. But CVET is a resource of the state of California, and it is hosted by the University of California, Davis. And it provides support to and education to veterinarians and techs and animal disaster service workers who are not professional vets to acquire really top level training on just about everything that Zach covered and then some, so that we're able to be stronger resources to the veterinarians when the disaster happens. So let's see. So pretty much everything that I was going to cover to some extent has been covered by all the amazing subject matter experts who came before me. So Sam, let's just start out with how to find our information at HALTER Project. And I'll let people know why that's important. So that very first slide, that's the very first one that you have. If you can find it, and if you can't, don't worry.
So I started. Share.
That's okay. While Sam's doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about the HALTER Project. It is a program that is privately funded. We started it in 2013 because it was very difficult to get information about how to prepare to keep animals safe during and after natural disasters. And as I said a moment ago, I had some amazing and inspiring mentors from UC Davis Vet School, from Colorado State, from Louisiana Tech and Louisiana State, and a number of other people who were actively engaged in the space of animal disaster response, developing ways to form community animal response teams, working with local, state, and federal governments to strengthen standards for training for volunteer responders and veterinarians. And I quit my day job in 2016 to do this full time as an unpaid person. In 2016, also, we were honored by FEMA with 2 individual and community preparedness awards for the work that we were doing. We traveled to Washington, D.C. to pick up those awards, and had the opportunity to meet some very inspiring people from around the country and around the state. In 2017, my own home, I live on a ranch, a small ranch, so I'm kind of a small acreage kind of person. And my ranch, where I was living at that time and still do, is at the foot of a mountain range that historically burns very hot. And in 2017, we had what at that time was the most catastrophic, largest fire in California history, with 0 advance warning, 92-mile-an-hour winds on my doorstep. And I had 2 cats in the house, 1 cat in the barn, 7 horses in the pasture, a mule. My husband was sound asleep in his recliner. I had other employees on the ranch. And we were able to evacuate everyone to a place of safety on our property in about 7 minutes. We were able to do that because we had plans. We were fairly well prepared. We did discover that we could be better prepared. But because we had talked about what we would do in various types of emergencies, and we had actually run drills, the muscle memory kicked in, even though it was terrifying to be in that environment. I got to tell you, it's loud. It's what firefighters often refer to as the sound of being inside a jet engine. And that's exactly what it sounded like. But that jet engine is throwing burning pieces of trees and shrubs and buildings at you. Our property was cut off immediately. All escape routes were closed off within literally 1 to 2 minutes. But we were able to get ourselves and our animals, keep them safe. We were able to shelter in place for several days until our friends from UC Davis were able to get a mission order to come and help us evacuate all our animals up to a ranch in Northern California. And I even sent my cats off with the horses and the mule. So I'm here to tell all of you, particularly those of you who are not commercial farmers and ranchers and livestock producers, that you heard us all emphasize repeatedly the power of preparedness. And I'm here to tell you it really, really works. I have a good friend who is a subject matter expert in preparedness for people. He's a retired basketball coach. One of his favorite sayings is one that I like to repeat often when I deliver these types of presentations, and that is practice makes permanent. So gotcha, right? You thought I was going to say something else. But how do you plan? Sam, can you pull up that slide that has a picture of our 3 workbooks on it? So what's the difference between talking about it, listening to these amazing experts share all of their knowledge and expertise and good resources? It's actually sitting down and walking the walk, making a plan, putting it in writing, sharing it with others, making multiple copies, storing a copy where it's going to be secure, it's going to be stored digitally, and you can access it if everything burns. Making sure that your animal buddy network, and again, you heard Cindy and you heard, I think, Kerri, you heard everybody talk about the importance and the value of knowing your neighbors, working together. I cannot stress that enough. So we have put together 3 workbooks for Clark County, for Clark Conservation, and they are kind of like Goldilocks and the 3 bears and the 3 chairs, right? So we've got a small, medium, and large version. We have more available, but these are the 3 that focus on Clark County and the state of Washington resources. We've included all the resources that I think all of our speakers have referenced, and then some, including the American Veterinary Medical Association, the ASPCA, USDA, Washington State Department of Agriculture, Clark Conservation, CRESA, and a number of others. So why 3 workbooks? Well, starting at the littlest one, if the shoe fits, or if the chair fits or the workbook fits, choose that one. Oh, and these are all available on our website. You can see the link on this slide, and they will all be available really soon on the Clark Conservation website as well. So, Animal Disaster Action Plan. That is for all of you who have pets and maybe a few backyard critters. So you've got pets, maybe you have some horses or alpacas or goats or donkeys or minis or chickens. So for those of you who have pets and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, that is your disaster action plan workbook, and it's just right for you. The one in the middle is our barn and ranch safety planner. So that is the workbook for anybody who has either a private boarding facility, you just have large animals at home on your ranch, maybe you ride, maybe you're part of a 4-H or FFA family, maybe you have a little CSA, maybe a small community supported ag operation, but you're not a big commercial producer. This is the workbook that's going to help you ramp up the readiness at home. And one of our really big talking points is the importance of making your home and your animals' home as safe as they can possibly be. And so Ryan started us off talking about defensible space. We have graphics in all of these workbooks that actually illustrate those 0 to 5 ignition zones, how to think about creating defensible space, not just around your home, but around the places on your property where your animals live. That workbook contains a property safety checklist, as well as a barn fire safety checklist from the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, and lots of other information. The biggest chair, the Papa Bear size workbook, is something that we actually created for the California Alpaca Association, and then we converted it into our small farm safety planner, so our small farm disaster planner. And it is even more robust. So it is designed for those of you who actually are commercial livestock producers. It includes all the information that I just sketched out, plus a lot more. One of the important sets of documents that we've included in both our barn and ranch safety planner and the small farm workbook are animal care and feeding guides published by CVET, the California Veterinary Emergency Teams. And while these are designed primarily for animal disaster responders, they are outstanding resources for anybody who might be tasked with taking care of your animals during and after a disaster. A really big part of knowing how to plan, I don't know, Sam, if you can find one of our slides that says know when to go, when to prep and when to go. You might pull one of those up. In the meantime, I'll talk about it in the interest of time. Oh, good job, Sam. We put together a whole bunch of slides because I wasn't sure what other people would be talking about. So I'm kind of winging it and keying off all the great information that each of the speakers has covered. So knowing how to plan for evacuation and how to plan for sheltering in place is a critical part of your animal disaster plan. How do you decide if it even makes sense to consider a shelter in place plan? Well, if we're talking about wildfire and you are a small acreage owner, if you're not a big commercial producer, you probably want to put a strong emphasis on an evacuation plan. How do you determine whether it might be better for your animals to be sheltered in place? By assessing the risks. And all of our workbooks have information about risk assessment. Our barn and ranch workbook and our small farm workbook go into risk assessment in great detail. Zach has really done a great job of outlining extensively the health impacts that you need to consider. and they can be long-term. And I have personally seen a lot of those health impacts as a field responder. So you need to assess your risks. How safe can you really make your property for your animals? So these workbooks contain checklists and safety self-assessments that will help you make those kinds of decisions. When you are planning to evacuate, again, when do you go? So in Washington, you've already heard Cindy and Kerri, and I think Ryan all talk about the levels of evacuation, that you have a ready, set, go 3-level plan. And that's generally tied to weather alerts. Several of our speakers have referenced the importance of knowing how to get emergency alerts. I can't stress that enough, because if you are not connected with your emergency communications, you don't know what's coming down the pipes. And knowing what type of weather you're looking at, whether it's fire weather, whether it's severe storm, whether it's a flash flood warning, we are fortunate now to get that kind of information from our predictive weather services quite a ways out, far in advance. And so this is a hard pill for people to swallow, but the time to get ready is year round. That's when you plan. You talk about it, you think about it, and you write your plan. The time to get set is when you get those weather watches and some severe weather warnings. But really, as Ryan said, and I'm sorry, as Zach said for sure, and I think Kerri also mentioned this, we are huge proponents of leaving long before someone tells you it's time to go. And so that means that you are planning and preparing during blue sky times and when you get a weather watch. And a weather watch is the lowest level of weather alert. So that means it's out there, you're watching it, you know it might come your way, but it's it's a ways out there. When that weather watch is elevated to a weather warning, honestly, folks, those of you with old horses, small ruminants, donkeys, animals that haven't been loaded in a long time, anything that could slow you down, even if it's you, if you have a joint replacement, if you have somebody you're taking care of who's going to slow you down, if the grandkids are with you, or you've got a sleepover, you need to look at who else you need to take care of, how long it's going to take you to get everybody loaded into the car and on the road. And you do not want to be making that trip during dangerous driving and weather conditions, when you could be impacted by horrendous traffic jams that result in you being stuck for hours, literally hours, in heat, in smoky conditions, all the things that you're trying to avoid. So the time to go is before you get to that point. And that's hard. And we talked about it a little bit earlier that, what's the worst that could happen? You load everybody up when it's calm. You can do it safely. Driving conditions are not going to be hazardous. You have a destination to go to. You have helpers who can come and help you do it. And you spend a couple of days in safety and calm and peace. Everybody stays healthy, hopefully, and low stress. And then you come home. And if the bad thing does happen, then aren't you glad that you moved everyone, including yourselves and the animals, when you could do it with the least amount of stress? A word about sheltering. So emergency shelters can be a great resort. We try to use them for animals as well as people as a last resort, because no matter how well an emergency shelter is run, no matter how conscientious the levels of biosafety and security, sooner or later, just like preschool, when you put all those people or all those animals together in a congregate facility, someone's going to start getting sick, and then more animals are going to get sick. So this is where your personal resource network really comes into play. And we do talk about that. Cindy gave you some great ideas for Clark County and your part of Washington in general, as to how to find those resources, how to identify the community groups, the neighbors, the clubs, the associations who can help you move the kinds of animals that you have, and the value of that neighbor to neighbor connection. So I think, just about out of time. It was fascinating listening to everyone who came before me. Really, I want you to all come and present with me forever. This really was the A team. And to those of you listening, I just want to emphasize that HALTER Project is a resource for all of you. While I live in Sonoma County, California, you've heard a lot about California and the areas that burn. And yes, I do live in one of those areas. And I'm sort of blessed and cursed to be in California, the state that many refer to as the disaster Disneyland. We do take an all hazards, all species approach to planning for disasters. While we are at this moment very fire focused, keep in mind that you do get floods, you do get landslides. We live on the West Coast, so the elephant in the room is earthquake. We do have information in our workbooks about how to do what you can to try to ride out an earthquake with your animals, and how to keep yourself and your animals as safe as possible in the aftermath of an earthquake. And in Washington, something that nobody tonight has talked about, but it is an issue, you have volcanoes. So something that is very scary, and primarily you need to be aware of the hazards. And that's how you create your strong disaster plan. You identify all the things that could happen to you, the things that are most likely to impact you, and then what you need to do to reduce the risks to yourself, your family, and your animals. And again, all of our resource workbooks have information about personal preparedness as well as preparedness for your animals, because if you're not safe, you can't keep anyone else safe. And you've heard at least 2 other people reference that. And it's true. It all starts with us. So please visit us at halterproject.org. You can also hang out with us on our YouTube channel, which is Halter Project on YouTube. I think I can stick around for a couple of minutes and answer questions if there are any. If you think of something, I think you can write to Sam. And I'm hoping that when this webinar is available on the Clark County website and the Halter Project YouTube channel, that lots and lots and lots of your friends and neighbors will watch it together, and you can all learn and talk and plan together about how to keep your animals, your pets, your equines, your backyard critters safer during and after natural disasters. Thanks for spending this Tuesday evening with us. It's really been an honor to be part of this group. And I want to thank Clark Conservation and Samantha for putting it together and including us.
Thank you so much, Julie. Your passion for this is just makes it all the better.
Well, it takes one to know one. We're definitely part of a herd here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so we have about 6 minutes left before the 8 o'clock mark. So I do want to open it up for any questions from the audience if we have any. Feel free to put them in the chat, or just go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to do that. Got a lot of good experts here, so let's use them while we can.
If no one has a question, there's one more point I'd like to make that I didn't want to run out of time, but planning will help you be calmer. It's definitely a little anxiety producing when you're in it and you're thinking about it. But I am here to tell you that having a plan, practicing your plan, sharing your plan with others is going to really help you if the bad things happen, and you have to implement your plan. It's also going to make you the calm pack leader, herd leader, flock leader, neighborhood leader, family leader. If you can be calm, as animal people, that it's going to go a lot further toward keeping your animals and everyone around you calmer. So I usually end with that. And so I'd like to just throw that out there.
Hey, Sam, this is Alice Heller. Hey, as soon as you get those disaster booklets,
Yeah.
could you let me know? So I think with Executive Course Council,
Mhm.
we'd like to get the word out about those. I think those would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alice, this is Julie. Cindy actually gave a huge shout out to you guys. I wanted to do the same. I've actually been a board member of 2 different horse councils down here, and I want to connect with you. I joined when I learned about the work that you had done. I joined your executive horse council because you are really to be applauded for doing the work that you've done and working so hard to engage the equestrian community there, because it's hard to do. Horse people are tough. I am one. I know.
Did you send it in a thing in already?
I did. We did a couple of weeks ago. We did.
Oh, I think I might have got it. I'll check that.
Yeah,
Great.
we're really impressed, and we wanted to support you. So
Right, because we also put out that booklet that Sam helped us put together, a trifold that we put out, plus we put stuff in our equine directory. But I think these action planners will be wonderful.
we would be very happy to do a co-branded equine barn workbook for you. We've done those for a number of other horse councils, and we could easily do that. So get in touch with me after the webinar.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome. I love the connections. Any questions or any last comments from the speakers or the audience members? Give it like 30 seconds, maybe.
I just want to say thanks. The more you know, the more you grow, as they say. And even though there's a smaller number here, if some of these people some of us attending can just share this with our neighbors or our friends.
Absolutely. We will put it on our YouTube channel, and we will share information that all of these resources are available at Clark Conservation. I was telling Sam just before we started that I spent the part of last week at the California State Alpaca Show, and I met a bunch of alpaca breeders from Washington. And they were very excited to get the alpaca workbook. So it's been a lot of great connections, and Sam you really put together a great group, and I'm so honored to be part of it. Well, Zach, are you still there? Is Zach still with us?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, Zach, were you on the student vert?
I was by the time I moved to California, I was already a veterinarian, so I was the regular veterinary members.
Got it. Okay.
I was a resident, so I had the students kind of tagging along with.
Okay. And
all the people you mentioned, I've had a lot of.
I recognize, I recognize the language. So I look forward to meeting you or chatting with you later on. But kind of tagging along.
Of course, we all owe a lot to Dr. Madigan and all the work that he's done.
Dr. Madigan, Dr. Davis, and Dr. Osborne. So I'm old. I was around when Dr. Osborne was still the dean of the vet school, but they all just kind of, I always say, they held me up by the ankles and dumped me headfirst into the tank of animal disaster preparedness and large animal technical rescue. And they said, you can do this, and don't worry, we won't let you drown. So it's connected me with a lot of great people. So
they must keep doing that, because they did the same thing to me, and I'm sure still
they see us coming. Anyways, great to meet you, and your presentation was really great, especially for a vet. I think you know what I mean.
Sorry to say it comes from personal experience, and I'm not. It's been tough times for a lot of people, but I'm glad has a positive outcome for.
There has been, and for those listening, I'm really glad that you were able to. You and I think Kerri also referenced some of the mutual aid resources that are available when things start getting larger than our local response resources and emergency managers can cope with. And if it is of any comfort to those of you listening, we do have information in every one of the workbooks about what to do when you cannot evacuate your animals. And the number one message is plan for that long before by contacting these great local resources. And we do mention these great regional and national resources that have evolved over the last 15 or 20 years to help animals in these large-scale disasters. Thank you to our vets. Big shout out to vets.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for staying here till the end. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Ryan, Terry, Cindy, Kerri, Zach, Julie. I really appreciate all of your time.
Huge shout out to you for getting this all together.
Yeah, well, I will send out slides and information to the attendees and probably a quick follow-up with the presenters as well. So thanks everyone, and
Thank you.
see you all.
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks everybody
pleasure.
who
Thank
joined
you.
us.